So my name's Chris McCormick, Christopher, whichever you prefer. I am the disaster recovery and mitigation financial specialist. I pretty much do look over the RFFs and performance measures for disaster recovery and mitigation, and I'm pretty much what tells HUD how the grants are running for our disaster projects. Today we're going to go over procurement. And I want to start off with a little joke, try to lighten things up. They always put procurement in the morning because it's a very dry presentation. So let's try to lighten things up a little bit. So I found this the other day. It goes, why did the procurement officer bring a ladder to the office party? Because costs were through the roof. All right. So, I like it. So, when it comes to procurement policy, the primary goal is so that we can ensure open and free competition among all our firms throughout the state of Missouri. The goal of the state CDBG program is to ensure that small firms, along with women and minority-owned businesses, have a chance to participate in any contracts that are out there. The CDBG program follows the state procurement process codified in Missouri statutes. Communities may have their own written procurement policy. They just got to make sure that the CDBG program's current policy must be followed at a minimum. Must state that how the community will handle money and resolve disputes. If the community does not have a policy, they must adopt CDBGs, again, because it's the most minimum for all phases of the funded project, and that policy must be able to use with projects outside of CDBG. There is a good resource out there. The Missouri Municipal League can assist in adopting a procurement policy for communities. Disaster recovery and mitigation grants need to meet federal requirements, which include things like independent cost estimates and cost reasonableness analysis. These are for procurements that are exceeding $250,000. Subrecipients must make these independent estimates before receiving bids, which can be satisfied by the engineer or architect doing the initial cost estimate and the preliminary reports, as well as providing a final cost estimate. The state CDBG program's conflict of interest policy is similar to those out in federal regulations. Communities must have a written conflict of interest policy. The policy must define conflicts and employee standards of conduct. This policy may be incorporated into the local procurement policy, such as ours. So when it comes to conflict of interest, persons overseeing the grant who can gain inside information, they cannot obtain a financial interest from the CDBG program, have an interest in a contract or subcontract. So if there's, a mayor out there whose side gig is as a contractor, he can't bid on a project. He can't submit a bid for a project. Grant administrators must recuse themselves if they do plan to submit a proposal for services. Administrators may provide the procurement chapter from the CDBG admin manual and the samples included in that chapter to the subrecipient. Administrator may also suggest that the subrecipient contact CDBG for technical assistance. The PAR request for qualifications for engineering, architecture, and construction inspection must either include the final design or disclose the firm who developed the PER. Mention any familiarity and structure the rating to not favor that familiarity. Documentation disclosing any potential perceived conflict of interest must be provided with any RFQ. One final note, conflict of interest cannot be corrected after it occurs. Recognize it and take action ahead of time. Solicitation and acceptance of gifts is codified in federal regulations. It does require grant recipients to maintain written standards of conduct prohibiting persons from soliciting or accepting gratuities, favors, or anything of monetary value from contractors or parties to subcontracts. And this can include things like payment made or change expense, any gift or item of value bestowed, including any food or beverage, any price charge or fee waived. So just the subsidiaries do need to be a little more careful about going out to lunch with contractors. They can't, contractors can't pay for their lunch. It could be perceived as receiving a gift or gratuity. Just got to be mindful of those things. All services paid for with CDBG funds must be procured according to proper procurement methods, and we got things like the micro purchase, supplies or services not exceeding a total of $3,000. Any construction over $2,000 is subject to Davis-Bacon and can be awarded without solicitation of competitive quotes, but should be distributed equitably among qualified suppliers. Then we have the small purchase, which is supplies or services to cost less than $100,000, awarded after price or rate quotes obtained from an adequate number of qualified suppliers. State statute requirement for counties to advertise. That's counties got to advertise in newspapers for 2 consecutive weeks. Competitive sealed bids. This includes goods or services expected to be $100,000 or more. Bids publicly solicited and require a lump sum or unit price. Contract is awarded to the lowest, most responsible and responsive bid. Bids must be advertised in the newspaper once a week for 2 consecutive weeks and solicited to an adequate number of suppliers. This is including our minority-owned, our women-owned, and our disadvantaged business enterprises, including Section 3 firms. We want to make sure we are reaching out to those. Administrators are responsible to ensure solicitation is done correctly. Sealed bids are opened publicly at least a week after the final advertisement. Competitive proposals. These are your RFPs and RFQs used for professional services, including administration, engineering, architecture, so on and so forth. Awarded after soliciting to adequate number of sources, including our BB, Weeby, DB Section 3 firms. Awarded to lowest and best proposal after subrecipient's technical evaluation. Counties are subject to formal advertisement, as mentioned previously, and CDBG administration lists must be used for admin solicitation. Exception is for RPCs and COGS as a sub-applicant, providing activity delivery is an option. Price is not a selection factor for engineering and architecture services. After a qualifying firm is selected, a price can be negotiated. Identify evaluation factors, see what is important to the subrecipients and what is needed for the contract. And pre-grant costs must be separated and are not eligible for grant reimbursement. All unsuccessful bidders must be notified in writing. There is a non-competitive proposals. They may solicit for non-competitive proposals if supplies, services, or construction available from one source, this is your sole source procurement, and in an instant of public emergency, but CDBG does need to authorize that. Procurement waivers may be considered when less than 3 responses were received. The subrecipients must submit a request for waiver to CDBG prior to awarding contract, because we want to make sure that you're doing the best you can, doing your due diligence to go out there and solicit for contracts. Disaster recovery and mitigation procurements must be submitted to CDBG for the website. We do need to post our procurements and contracts to our webpage as part of our Federal Register notices. There has been some new additions to our procurement chapter. If project is not awarded CDBG funds, contract with the firm is no longer valid. If an application is denied, the procurement process for admin, engineering, and architecture services can be used for the following cycle if there's no change to the project scope. Did I skip a slide? Sorry about that. Just going back one. So Continuing with our new addition to the Chapter 9 procurement policy, beginning with FY26 competitive cycle, the RFP/RFQ must contain a requirement for the proposal to provide the date if it will expire. It will expire. Expiration must be no more than 6 months and ensures the firm's qualifications don't change between response submission and execution. Subrecipient must execute a contract with the firm prior to expiration and may contingent on receiving CDBG funds. Contract must include an end date, and if the proposal expires prior to execution, the subrecipient will need to conduct another procurement process. Did that one? There we go. If the procurement process was not conducted in compliance with all requirements, the subrecipient may be asked to redo the process. We do provide a contract content guide on the CDBG website. We encourage you to use it. Upon finishing, send to CDBG compliance specialist for review. We do need to look over the contract information. Administrators responsible for up-to-date documents and compliance. Bid advertising must contain a bid bond requirement of 5% and other bonding. Labor provisions and prevailing wage certifications, Section 3 information, and equal employment opportunity. When it comes to construction procurement, there can be addendums made, but they must be made 72 hours prior to bid submission. If a deadline is less than 72 hours away, got to delay that bid opening at least 1 full week. Publish requests for bids in a newspaper for 2 weeks. Make sure we're soliciting our firms here, and they're directly solicited and provide their certification. I believe we went over how to get that certification earlier this week. Alternatives may be used in bidding, taken in order they are listed, and provide details on how a low bidder will be selected. If the subrecipient has reason to believe that available funds will not be enough for the full scope of work, that's when it comes to the alternatives. Requests for federal wage determinations are made 10 days before the first advertisement. This is to determine that the federal wage decision has not changed and should be checked 10 days before bid opening. State annual wage orders must be inserted and locked in before first advertisement for bids. Contract awarded to the lowest, most responsible and responsive bidder. Negotiation is allowed for bids over budget. Reduced contract units at the bid unit price. Should not exceed 25% of the total contract bid amount, and reduction of contract units should not result in a change of the low bidder, or all bids must be rejected. Make sure you're checking your references, and bid opening must be public. Hold meeting and take minutes. Unsuccessful bidder notification needs to be done in writing, so if there's anybody who did not get the bid, should be mailed a letter saying, hey, you did not receive the bid, so on and so forth. But if they were at the meeting when the bids were opened and they have a sign-in sheet, that can supplement for those letters because they were obviously notified in real time. All services must be cleared for debarment and no active exclusions on SAMGov for bids over $25,000. Always contact CDBG before awarding a contract so we can do our debarment checks. Again, must solicit our favorite firms here for all services. Provide documentation if none are available, and services that require advanced degrees of professional licensing does not require Section 3 solicitation. So now we're going to move into the Build America, Buy America Act. This is a new act that came up in the past couple of years, and it is to domestically source materials for infrastructure projects funded by federal financial assistance. That includes grants, loans, revolving loans, so on and so forth from the federal government. It is to stimulate private sector investments in manufacturing and bolster supply chains and create jobs. This will affect certain materials like iron, steel, manufactured products, and construction materials. But I will say that projects of pre-post-disaster emergency response are exempt. This includes our CDBG DR, MIT, NDR, CARES Act, Poplar CARES Act, and ESG CD funds. So those of you that have disaster recovery, we get a break from this. Some definitions to go over. Cognizant agency is the agency providing the majority of funds. So as an example, if we at CDBG provide $100,000 in funds, but let's say USDA provides $200,000 in funds, then you will follow USDA rules on how to implement BABA. An infrastructure project is any activity related to construction, alteration, maintenance, or repair for infrastructure. Iron and steel materials are materials that consist wholly or in part of iron or steel. Then there are construction materials, materials that consist only one of the items listed below. We have non-ferrous metals, plastic and polymer-based products, glass, fiber optic cable, optical fiber, lumber, engineered wood, drywall piping, and tubing. Minor additions to these construction materials do not change the categorization. And does not include cement and cementatious materials, stone, sand, gravel, aggregate, so on and so forth. So I believe that includes like asphalt. You don't need to have that locally sourced when you're doing like your streets and roads projects. So definition of manufactured product, these are materials that have been formed into a specific form or shape, combined with other materials to create a product that is different than the individual materials. So this is, for an example, is like your plastic frame sliding window, because it has that polymer base and then it has glass. So instead of just saying, you know, it's a construction material separately, together it's a manufactured product. HUD has implemented a plan to implement the BABA in steps. Iron and steel is, BABA will affect iron and steel products starting November 15th, 2022. These really are, for us, our fiscal year 23 allocations. If you have fiscal year 23, it'll only affect iron and steel. Manufactured products and construction materials you don't have to worry about. But then there's fiscal year 24. These are specifically listed construction materials, and they include things like non-ferrous metals, lumber, plastic and polymer-based composite building materials, pipe and tubing, and then also the iron and steel, so how it kind of adds on. And then fiscal year 25 will be all other construction materials that were previously listed. The materials include plastic and polymer, all other plastic and polymer-based products, glass, fiber optic cable, optical fiber, engineered wood, and drywall. We do have 6 steps to consider when it comes to implementing the BAP, which is also Buy American preference. I meant to tell you that that is interchangeable with BABA. We're going to ask ourselves these several questions. Are the funds being used for an infrastructure project? Does the project use funds from a covered CPT program? If you're getting funds from us, we're considered a CPD program. So most of the time the answer will be yes. Does the project use products subject to the BAP? That is those materials we just went over. Were CPD funds obligated on or after the effective date? That's the implementation plan. There are general waivers that we can consider as we go through, and then there are project-specific waivers that are more for the grantee to be able to decide if we can fully waive the BABA from a project. Is the project covered in whole or part by any of the HUD general waivers? Those general waivers include things like exigent circumstances, small grants, de minimis, tribal recipients, and Pacific Island Territory recipients. We obviously do not allocate funds to tribal or Pacific Islander, but we will go over the exigent, small, and de minimis waivers here in a moment. They are effective from that November 23rd, 2022 period for 5 years, ending in November 23rd, 2027. The exigent circumstances waiver. This is your urgent need by a grantee to immediately complete an infrastructure project because of threat of life, safety, or property of residents and the community. So any kind of emergency that you need to get done. The example HUD used was if a pipe were to burst in a homeless shelter and funds for repairs were needed immediately. There's a small grants waiver. If it waives BABA for all infrastructure projects whose total cost is equal to or less than the simplified acquisition threshold, which is currently set at $250,000. I do want to say if your infrastructure project only had $200,000 in CDBG funds, but had $100,000 in other federal, state, or private funds, then the small grants waiver would not apply. So you're still over that. Even though you only have $200,000 in federal funds, the total amount puts you over that threshold. I do also want to point out that, let's just say that you got a $200,000 grant, that was all you had to do in the infrastructure project, and then you're halfway through your project, find that you're having some cost overruns, and you need to request $60,000 more. That will actually put you over that threshold, and well, we obviously can't go back and source the materials that we already laid down. So there is a chance that we can get a project-specific waiver from HUD and be able to waive those products from before, but products moving forward would have to be locally sourced. Then there's the de minimis waiver. This one's a little tricky. The de minimis waiver allows grantees to waive the BAP for materials whose total cost is less than 5% of all covered materials used in the project, up to $1 million. I do have an example here in a second. Hopefully it'll help. If a project has a need for a particular product for which no domestically produced equivalent is available and the cost is below the de minimis limit, the BAP can be waived for those products, only up to that calculated limit or the 1 million amount, whichever is less. But the BAP will still apply to other materials used in the project. So, as an example, if we have an infrastructure project with a total budget of $500,000 for iron, steel, manufactured products, and construction materials, a contractor was able to find American-made iron fire hydrants, but could not find bike racks, benches, and light posts. And as you can see, we have our list of materials on this side, and we got our bike racks at $15,000, our benches at $10,000, and what was I say? Light posts. Light posts at $210,000. So as with that $500,000, 5% of it, we can, for lack of a better term, write off $25,000. So we don't have to find bike racks or benches made in America. We can find them overseas if need be, that with the cheapest cost. That's the de minimis waiver. So we still have a struggle of what about light posts? We still got to find light posts at $210,000. And that leads us to the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. It is a national network that comprises of the National Institute of Standards and Technology Extension Partnership. Each center is a partnership between the federal government and a variety of public or private entities. Project managers will contact the local MEP center. Here it's the Missouri Enterprise, where they will assist completing the supplier scouting opportunity synopsis form and look for domestically sourced products. And one thing that's good about this program, one thing that they do is that even if you yourselves cannot find, or the contractors cannot find a specific manufacturer of, let's say, light posts, they'll find a manufacturer who used to do light posts and now do something else and still have the materials to do that. So I think one thing they said in the HUD training last year was some recipient needed sleeping bags, and they found a manufacturer of teddy bears who still had the products to be able to make sleeping bags for them. So And one good thing is that MEP services are free of charge. So then we got our project-specific waivers. Could the project qualify for project-specific waivers? Prior to continuing with this waiver process, we must first ensure that the project is subject to BABA, that's infrastructure project, over $250,000. The project does not qualify for any HUD general waivers, we just went over. The necessary market research to support the need for a waiver has been documented. That is that MEP service center. They're going to want some documentation that you took your due diligence to find American-made products. And if you weren't able to find those products, this is the next and final step. Including the results of the local MEP center supplier scouting process is the best practice to demonstrate due diligence, and grantees, the state of Missouri must apply for the waiver, not the subrecipient contractor. So if you think that your project can go for one of these project-specific waivers, you've got to let us know, and we have to do the application to HUD. The 3 project-specific waivers include public interest. Applying FOB or BAP would be inconsistent with public interest. Non-availability. These are types of iron and steel manufactured products or construction materials are not produced in the U.S. in sufficient and reasonably available quantities or a satisfactory quality. And then an unreasonable cost waiver. Inclusion of those products and materials will increase the cost of the overall project by more than 25%. Any documentation supporting the above claims must be submitted to CDBG, and we will submit the request to waive. HUD and the OMB will review the waiver and publish it in the Federal Register for a 15-day public comment period. Review and approval can take 6 weeks or more, so be ready to plan for that. When approved, the state will be notified and the waiver will be posted on madeinamerica.gov. Further, more detailed information can be found on our Chapter 9 manual. I can say that I only scratched the surface of procurement. I highly recommend that you go out and go to the website and look at Chapter 9 and really educate yourselves on it. Believe me, I learned a lot.